Richard, it's good to see you. Lots of familiar faces.
Mr. Norman's there.
Okay, let's get started. And first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to the call. Quite a few new people on today's call, which is fabulous. For those that perhaps don't know me, my name is Stephen Knight. I'm the CEO of Pimento. If you don't know Pimento, Pimento is the largest independent agency network in the UK, some 200 agencies, 5,500 individuals. This is our second event of this year. I think last year, in association with the Alliance, we've got over 350 events on. It's great, as I say, to have so many familiar faces, but equally too, it's great to have so many new ones. So on today's call, we have a blend of brand owners, CMOs, Pimento clients, independent agency owners, Pimento members, guests, and our friends at the various associations that represent the communications industry. And for those that weren't on the previous calls, please remain on mute throughout. If you have any questions, at the bottom of your screen, you'll find there's a little green button, or next to the green button, where you can enter questions in the chat box. We hope to be able to open up for questions around about 10:50. If we don't get around to answering all your questions today, then we will follow up. And finally, as before, today's call is being recorded for those unable to attend, and the video will be available on the Pimento catch-up channel, which is on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and type in Pimento Agency. So where are we now? Quick sort of update on the world in which we live. Some of you will be aware that the Home Secretary is expected to announce further hotel quarantine mandatory embargoes, if you like, at 1:15 today. Certain countries expected to have the people to the UK from those countries put into their own expense. We have unfortunately passed the 100,000 corona deaths in the UK. The government is suggesting that an extra 50,000 people may well die of this dreadful virus between now and the end. More positively, we have now vaccinated 6 million people, of which 443,000 have actually had their second dose. This is by far the largest number in Europe. So we're leading Europe in one area. But today's question is much more based on where we are both economically and where our brand standing is in the world. And I hope, like many people, we feel primed and ready for a rebound in Q2. Certainly in this post-Brexit economy, with the new president in the White House, one wonders how brand Britain will recover its lost status as a leading nation. And to answer those questions, in the chair today, we have David Wheldon. Many of you will know David, certainly in my view, one of the most highly regarded CMOs of them all. For those that haven't followed his career as carefully as I have, he achieved Drum Magazine's Lifetime Achievement Award last year. Previous winners include both Keith Weed and Richard Branson. At the end of 2020, David stepped back from his position as Global CMO at RBS and former president of the World Federation of Advertisers. David started his career in advertising. I was fortunate enough to work for him at a little-known advertising agency called WCRS. He later went on to become the MD of Lohan Spink, president of BBDO Europe, before he moved client-side, first of all with Coca Cola as their global director of advertising, based over in Atlanta. He then ran Team Vodafone before being poached by his client to become global CMO for Vodafone. Under his tenure, Vodafone became the UK's most valuable global brand. From there, he moved on to save Barclays in the post-financial crisis world as CMO of Barclays, and then he was poached to do the same thing again as CEO of RBS. Mark Palmer, again, I expect a number of you know Mark. Mark started out his life as a mathematician and physicist. He then pivoted and became a professionally qualified market researcher, running his own consultancy. He's spent most of his career as executive head of strategy at some of the most creative and thoughtful advertising and media agencies, including WCRS, BNP and Dorland. He was nominated as one of the UK's top 10 media thinkers as a Planet and Campaigns magazine's fantasy agency of the millennium. His last paid job at least before his own business, was executive head of strategy at media agency OMD. And since he set up Maverick Planet, one of the first brand and businesses facilitating strategic change consultants, he has worked on projects with CEOs, CMOs, boards, and their teams. Google was his first client. The range of clients is very diverse and interesting in itself, and it tells you a lot about Mark. He's worked for Bupa, B-Sky, Cadbury's, The Economist, English Cricket, Ladbrokes, Lego, SSE, the Government of Denmark, and Noel Edmonds. Recently, he's been a guest lecturer and has facilitated change at the Henley School of Management, London Business School, UCR, and the School of Communication Arts. So David is in the chair. Mark's going to be firing the questions. Welcome to you both. It's great to have you both along. I'm going to hand over to Mark, and you can take it from here, sir.
Thank you very much. Can you all see us, presumably? Just get my slightly different view. David, you there? Got you. Right. Good morning, everybody. It's we won't hear laughs from our end, which is quite sad. Just a little bit of background for this. One of the things I did last year was start doing some more writing. So I write for something called The Article, which has got the likes of Alistair Campbell and various other people. And I wrote a post towards September because basically whatever happened to Brand Britain, which I mentioned that wouldn't it be interesting if instead of Dominic Cummings, that Boris Johnson had David Wheldon as an advisor. So that led Stephen to go, well, why don't you ask him then? So we have. So the whole point of this is I'm now putting David into the chair of all those questions I ask. Imagine he replaced Dominic Cummings as the advisor on Brand Britain. So David, first off, just clarify, what do you think a brand is in relation to a country? Because there's a Barclays study that we chatted about earlier that was there's 40 Britain's got like 42% of people will give a premium to what's called made in Britain, but it's more than that. What do you say a brand is?
Well, the whole notion of nation branding has arisen over the last 20 years because as brands have been put on corporate balance sheets and they are valued, and we've seen this last week, 2 examples of that. Boohoo buying the Debenhams brand for, I must say here, quite unbelievable, £55 million, and ASOS looking at other brands to buy, but nation brands benefit from the same financial impact. And that's why they're measured, they're looked at, and actually you get incoming investment, you get support for innovation, and you get more soft power. And there are endless lists that you and I have been trawling over to see where we currently stand in those. But just to bring it back to a brand, because brand, I found, especially when I worked in financial services, is one of those words that causes everybody's eyes to roll and their arms to fold. And you have to point out to them that, brand is everything. And actually my 2 favorite quotes on brand are the one that Aaron Sarin once said, a brand is what a brand does. And the other one, the Jeff Bezos one, which is brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And through those lenses, you can see that Brand Britain is in a bit of a, what should we say, pickle.
Pickle, okay.
Pickle, let's go with pickle.
So you and I both, we may as well get this out there. You and I both voted Remain, and we're trying not to make this political. One thing I noticed when I wrote my article, the moment you put Remain or Brexit in, you get like ones down either side of the scoring sheets whenever you put anything that's either side, just a journalistic note. So just to go through, what if I were to critique you, go, yes, but you voted Remain. Obviously, we're going to talk about Brexit, not Brexit, but the deal. How can you be regarded as someone who's got a fair view on that? Because you've already got a prejudice, shall we say? What would be your answer?
Well, I mean, first of all, Stephen went through my CV. By the way, isn't it wonderful, especially when you retire, that you always get promoted by the people that talk about you? I wasn't actually the CMO of Vodafone. I was a global brand director, but it doesn't matter. But, in every company I've worked, the one thing I've learned is you are useless if you can't speak truth to power. You cannot be an effective CMO unless you use data, unless you use that data to put the truth on the table, however uncomfortable it is. And I would do that were I to have this putative gig. So first of all, you have to speak truth to power. I mean, many of you will know I'm married to a Spaniard. I'm the very proud father of 3 proud European sons, and this household will always be European. I voted Remain, but we voted Brexit. That is the decision that the country came to, and that's what we should be looking at to see what strategy should we have pursued to get it. Now, let me get in here. You know, I feel slightly awkward doing this event the day after 100,000 deaths has been announced, and I don't in any way wish to belittle the task of the government or indeed the grief that that's caused probably many people on this call. So let me say that because I think it's important. But I would say, you know, that Boris and Dominic, that dynamic duo that were once a challenger brand, ended up getting Boris in power with an 80-seat majority. And they were going to get Brexit done. They were going to do that before the pandemic hit. I find it odd that they didn't appear to have a clear strategy of how they were going to do that.
So you mentioned that they're a challenger brand. Does that, so you, going back to as we were chatting with, the issue you think that they had is they were too political in what they've been doing? What's the problem? You know, they were very successful. You can't knock that Cummings and Boris as a challenge brand, won Brexit, won an election campaign, massive majority. So why can't they then go on? What have they got wrong? Or how should they have changed when they started?
Well, let's just kind of hone in on the diagnosis phase of what you do before you build a brand strategy, or indeed before you deliver Brexit. You would have thought that it might have been prudent to look at the economics behind it to see what were the strengths of brand Britain, where was the money made, and what should we focus on to protect that and give us a strong platform as we go ahead in a post-Europe world. If you had done that, you wouldn't have alighted on the fishing industry as the industry to focus on. You would have almost certainly started with the industry that provides 1 in 14 jobs in the UK, that is a massive taxpayer, and that is indeed financial services. Financial services has not been considered as part of this deal, much to the irritation of all in it. I won't get into that too much, but you know, just to go back and make this simple, when I was first starting out at RBS, I was much beguiled by one of the brands, which was the Isle of Man Bank, not least because the Isle of Man Bank was the only bank that I was aware of that actually had left-handed checkbooks, which struck me as a remarkable customer insight delivered. Had I focused on the Isle of Man Bank instead of on NatWest, where all the money was made, I don't think I'd have lasted very long in my job. And this is, you know, the problem with fishing and not financial services. So we didn't use data, we used politics. And I'm saying this before we get to the pandemic. So I think a key error made by not actually using the data before setting the strategy and getting Brexit done became, you know, to observe it was horrendous for all of us. You know, there were those moments when we didn't think we were going to have a deal at all, and we ended up thinking no deal is better. A deal is better than no deal, but we have, it's not, what did Boris describe it as? Cakeist. We've had our cake and eat it. It's a very unbaked cake with very little tasty ingredient in it.
So go back to the brand. You're saying if he's a politician before, they should have, when they, you know, he inherited the deal that was already, admittedly he campaigned to get Brexit done, or that's another phrase we can talk about, but he had to sort the deal out that Theresa May left. So, you know, surely in the real world, it's tough, and but it's a negotiation. So in a negotiation, you win some and you lose. So what's the problem with, it's just unfortunate, you know, it's you know, yes, he shouldn't have promised, but going back to brand Britain, in the middle of the deals, what did they do that was wrong that they could have done different? You know, weren't they always just going to get screwed anyway? Where's the choices that they made? Right.
Well, they didn't make many, but they did make one, if I may, gross error. All brands are built on the most important pillar, which is the pillar of trust. And you have to have trust. And actually, one of our historical strengths was indeed, you know, if we said we were going to do something, we would. If we shook hands on something, you know, in the unfortunate phrase, an Englishman's word is his bond, because of course it's Britain's word is his bond. And we were prepared to break the law that we had signed. Excuse me, 5 previous prime ministers found that unacceptable from the current Prime Minister. And I should insert here, you know, I've always believed, and I've always talked to the CEOs that I've worked for, that to build an effective brand, the CEO has to act as the brand director and has to own it. And to continue that, what that means is the CEO, the PM, must own the brand. And actually destroying the trust pillar, not a smart idea. Ask me a question while I drink some water.
Yeah, that's okay. So go back to this thing about therefore rhetoric. So one of the things you chat, there's the phrase that you when we chatted before, this your problem with rhetoric versus reality. So we had an oven ready deal, yeah. And going back to this trust, the stuff I'll pull up, there's some figures out from Ipsos, which said after the Brexit deal was done, it showed that 45% now think that it had a negative impact versus 25% think it was positive. Twice as many, 48%, think the country is heading in the wrong direction versus 24% who think we're heading in the right direction. So is this back to your trust, or is there a bigger issue here? And what's the issue with it? I mean, going back to brand Britain, they'll just go what it's this week.
Well, first of all, just on the trust thing, you know, we all make mistakes. I've made many of them. You know, when you make a mistake, you must own it. You must apologize for it. And above all, you must learn from it. We don't appear to have done any of those things against this big mistake. And we haven't even touched on the pandemic yet. We'll come to that. But I do think our reputation went down. My Spanish friends, when that happened, said, listen, enough already, you know, why don't you just go away and get out of Europe and get on with it? Because we had done something so fundamental, and I'm not sure that that's been fully appreciated, and the data shows it. You know, whichever list you look at, our reputation has plummeted, and if you know, the CEO should be worried about that. Let me just say that.
Okay, so if I take the word trust, and you talked earlier about the word soft power, all right, what's the difference between the opposite is hard power? Give me an example of countries that have got hard power versus countries that have got a soft power.
Would you mind if I park that and come on to it? Because just to build back on something we were touching on.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go chat.
Because I do think, you know, the root cause of some of our Brexit problems is to do with the fact that political advertising is not regulated in the same way that other advertising is. You can put extraordinary claims on the side of a bus. You can't say the wrong thing about your shampoo. You will be held to account. So there was some campaigning with some apparent facts in it, which were not wrong. And you've also seen the same data I have. When many of the people voted the way they did, see that data, they have cause for breath. But I don't want to go backwards. We must go forwards with what we've got. You know, we are in this and we should move ahead. But I've also seen the post that we were discussing. Let's take the music industry to come on to the soft power for a minute. You know, music industry is one of our real soft power things. When I was an English teacher many moons ago, I had this wonderful Egyptian in my beginners class who knew all of the lyrics of every single Beatles song, and he could speak to you about Norwegian Wood, but he was learning English. It was when it first dawned on me how much our music had traveled around the world. If you turn that into hard numbers, how much money it's made for this country as well, and what it's done for our brand reputation around the world. No accident that Tony Blair pounced on Cool Britannia, because he recognized that theme of the branding for us. But back to your question, you were on hard power, soft power. You know, we're no longer one of the leading countries in the world, but we've always had extraordinary soft power, home of diplomacy, home of the Magna Carta, home of reasonableness and balance, and great convening powers. We've always had an ability to bring people together to solve problems. And we appear to have stopped doing that. We appear to have gone our own way, not to great benefit.
So you and I are both fans of a different reason whether the Olympics was to the right objectives, because it said it was going to get more people to play sport. It's quite an interesting point, that though which it didn't end up achieving. But from the point of view what it did for brand Britain externally and internally, you and I are both fans. So was that a good example of when we got the soft powers right?
I think so. And actually, let's hover over Danny Boyle's opening ceremony, which was probably the best exposition of brand Britain I've ever seen. And to talk about us as the Isle of Wonder, you know, to have the NHS in there, to back to the trust thing, the fact that 10,000 volunteers made that event happen and were sworn to secrecy and didn't tell anybody about the opening ceremony. So until it was revealed, nobody knew. But front and centre, of course, was the NHS, just as they have been recently. The man that gave us the joy of the web front and centre as well, he didn't intend it to become what it's become. And of course, music was there. And it was a moment when we all felt immense pride in being British. And it came back. You could see that in the reputational scores, but it wasn't built on. We didn't actually take that forward. And again, just to share around a bit of the blame, some of the things that we said we were going to do at the time, we haven't followed through on and we haven't delivered against. And that's also what breaks trust. You know, when you make brand promises, you must mind the gap between the promise and the delivery. And you always need to do what you said. And I'm a big fan of under promising so that you can over deliver.
Right. So if we go to back to Brexit and the deal, the government would claim that what it's achieved is sovereignty. Okay. Happy with that? You know, that all the people voted for sovereignty, supposedly they've got sovereignty. What's the problem with sovereignty? You know, he's promised them my objective for you is sovereignty. Here you go. Congratulations.
Yeah, are all the people that have lost their jobs going to get a sovereignty certificate that they can put on their wall and look proudly at? Is the fishing industry going to be given sovereignty certificates? It's empty rhetoric. Now, it's very emotional rhetoric because it touches on a nerve that many people have. You know, when I was at school and we were still in lessons about the pink bits, it was the fading end of the empire and so on. And actually that word sovereignty conjured up notions of a Britain gone by. There's no substance behind it. We never went through what does it mean. There's much deeper and better analysis available if people want to look that up than me giving you an opinion on it. But I do think that was an overused word without any depth of meaning and what we'd get on the other side of it. Now, it was also sovereignty versus federalism. So, you know, the friends I have that have voted for Brexit, and I've had some good discussions, have some good reasons. Let me be scrupulously fair. One of them is we didn't vote to become part of federal Europe ever. Let me pause.
And if you've got, you know, we were chatting about just all this nature of if you add up all the numbers. So if you were a CMO and you were in charge of Brand Britain and you went into the board meeting and you went, right, this is the deal we've done. We've got fish, you know, it's your Isle of Man bank, 80% that services aren't there. There's the creative industries. How would you have got reaction if you'd gone into a board meeting and said that?
Well, boards are fabulously good at focusing on the numbers and ignoring the rhetoric. However good your presentation is, it's the substance they're interested in. And actually you have to have substance behind it. So I don't think any board I've reported into would ever have accepted that kind of analysis. They'd have wanted more depth. They might have been polite enough to go, good presentation, good point. Can you give us a bit more detail on and send you away to do some more homework? And
you don't think that's ever happened?
It doesn't appear to have. Now, let me again be very fair here. I don't know. You know, none of us do unless any of you have been deeply involved in the heart of this. We are observers of it. But what we also observe is their inability to articulate clearly what they're negotiating on and why. And if you go back to the famous red lines, I think we appear to have got one of them. It goes straight down the sea between Ireland and Wales. It was never going to happen, but it's happened.
Okay. So if I just pull out some numbers, I've got this. There are actually tracking studies of country brands. So bear with me while I just dig them up. So I've got the right page here. Excuse me. Yeah. So there's a couple of studies, two of which would put Britain over time. They're two different levels. The two main studies. One puts Britain at 17th, in the world, and the second puts it fourth, both putting it falling down, but they put America at 26th. And interestingly, we're declining slowly. These were both pre-Brexit and pre-Remain, okay? America was at 26, but was declining a much greater rate, and literally since Trump. So are there lessons or examples from America? Are we the same or are we different? Is America presumably is a harder power versus soft power, but are there lessons to be learned, do you think, that we should adhere to?
Well, hopefully. I mean, it is worth pointing out, I remember a friend of mine was surprised how upset I was about Brexit, and because he lives in New York, we were then talking about Trump. I said, here's the good news, in 4 years' time, you can get rid of him. We can't undo what's been done here. And he's gone. And I think the big lesson is to be seen in the way that Biden has started. And he started by listening to his audience and his broader one, understanding the state of brand USA in the world, and taking some decisive action to fix it. I mean, 15 executive orders straight off the get-go, rejoining the Paris Accord, rejoining the WHO, things that had everybody's jaw drop were great acts of immediacy. Also, just to kind of give a shout out to whoever the creative powers were behind the way they thought about the inauguration were brilliant. So the flags to represent the deaths rather than the people, the beautifully crafted speech using every speech technique, alliteration, the power of three, but actually delivered from the heart and the soul in a way that really compelled. And of course, to finish it off brilliantly, the bright new future and hope of that wonderful poet, Amanda Gorman, at the end, and what she said. So actually rebuilding America and rebuilding the brand through doing the right thing, using the power of language and talking about the need for unity and moving on, because he's got, let's face it, a considerable problem. He may not have to deal with a Brexit, but dealing with the division of the US is quite something. But, I don't think Boris in any way deserved to be called UK. What did Trump call him? Britain Trump. I don't think Boris is Britain Trump. Thank goodness, we must say.
So going back to this trust. So you're saying that Trump destroyed trust in America quicker than our current government is doing it in the UK, or are they both doing it?
I think so. I mean, I think he displayed another problem of brand building, which is, short-termism over long-termism. So yes, he did some good things to recover the economy to a certain degree, but most of his actions were short-term with no thought for the long-term impact of them. I don't want to get into some of them that were outrageous, but his views on diversity and inclusion, or rather his lack of views, didn't represent the America that I know. So he didn't appear to have been listening to an overall populace. He was always playing to his base, and he played to his base frighteningly well. And if you look at what he used to do on Twitter, it's astonishing. But that Wall Street Journal article that pulls out, what was he doing? Telling an untruth every 20 minutes of his administration. He said something that was factually incorrect, otherwise known, I believe, as a lie. And actually,
it's an alternative fact, I think.
but they weren't alternative facts; they were lies. So I don't think that you can brook any comparison between what's been happening here and what happened there. But I do think there's a lot to learn, and to kind of focus that right down. Hopefully, you've all read what Biden said after he spoke to Boris and compared that to what Boris said. And if you've read both of them, I wonder which story you believe. I am inclined to believe what Joe Biden said, actually, which was good conversation. He didn't big up, we're focusing on a deal, we're getting a deal, because he was re-establishing a relationship, rebuilding a bridge that had been broken. And Boris was still politicking. Delighted, of course, to get the first significant call as a European. I think he even made that gap.
What about the divisiveness? So it's, you could argue Trump's got the second biggest ever vote for a president. But also the other side, you've got, as you're saying about the inauguration, a country divided. How big, if you get the same with us, whether it's Brexit or whether it's the divisions between Scotland now and England, which has grown as part of what we've done, or the divisions between young versus, how big a problem as a brand is if you've got a divided audience to deal with?
I think it is a big problem, and it's to do again with not listening to your audience, you know. And actually, I like what Gordon Brown was talking about this week, the notion that we should have citizens' councils, we should involve the consumer and more directly in their point of view, and we should listen to them and flex. Because if not, you end up being tone deaf. And you know, history is littered with brands that have failed because nobody wanted to listen to what the data was. And you have to listen. You can't just plow on regardless. So I think we are, you know, we're on the brink of something dangerous. I'm also a fan of the union, I should say here, and I do hope that we can keep Britain together. But at the moment, you'd worry about the likelihood of that.
Yeah. So pick on the. So if I just recount what you said, you're saying if you're running a decent brand, the first thing you use is basically diligence. Yeah. Even when you're doing the deal, evaluating the deal, making a decision, the first thing you should do is and you mean numbers, not words, yeah?
I mean numbers, yeah.
What's the second thing that you then do?
But
so let's say done that. What's the second thing?
Diligence before you put your strategy together. And the great thing about strategy, as many people have said, is choosing what not to do and focusing on what you are going to do. And actually, to that regard, you know, I love that part of our future should be, we should be the digital leaders of the world. I loved the manifesto commitment that said everybody would get broadband at the fastest possible speeds. I loved the budget they then attached to it.
There's a but coming here.
Yeah, but, you know, here we are 12 months later, the budget has been cut by 75%. The timeline has been moved out and the target has been changed from everybody to 85%. Now, you see that, let's get to a real problem. You see that manifest itself in the problem of homeschooling that everybody's going through, because had we had that promise delivered, everybody would have had the high-speed broadband. Had we, in addition, given everybody who didn't have a laptop, we wouldn't be where we are. But the promise wasn't delivered and the money isn't there to deliver it. So that's another example of when you make a choice, be, I hate this word, choiceful, and be conscious of what choice you've made and deliver it. So I love the notion that we talked about broadband, we talked about digital Britain. I mean, I think that's our number one priority as a nation going ahead, to really build on that and build on our innovation. But to do that, you know, we're going to have to not do things. And again, just to go back to the corporate world, you know, I saw in several jobs I did how difficult that is, how difficult for people to let go of their pet projects, how difficult for a CEO to go, I know that's great, but we're not doing it anymore because we're doing this. So strategy is about the choices you make to not do things as well. And when you've decided what not to do, then you must focus on how you're going to deliver your strategy and not get beguiled by tactics. And, you know, many a brand plan falls down because everybody gets beguiled by the tactics. And actually, you know, let's focus now a little bit on COVID, if we could. And again, I think awful tragedy for all of us. We're all in lockdown. Here we are. And to anybody who's lost anybody, you know, condolences, sympathy. But it was never a political problem. It was a health problem. So as we look back, why was it politicized from the get-go? Why did we say things like we're going to build a world-beating track and trace system? Why was that hubris necessary? And why wasn't it delivered? And also, if you then put the money behind it, 40 million up in smoke, £1 million a day still going to Deloitte, I believe. And it was strangely not branded the UK track and trace system, because that's what it was. It had been outsourced. It was branded the NHS track and trace system, even though the NHS didn't own it and couldn't deliver it. So that on its own is an example of a difficult thing. And I as I say, I was deeply moved by Boris's empathetic speech yesterday, which I thought was fantastic. But when he then said, oh no, we hadn't made any mistakes, I didn't actually say this, we've done everything we could to save lives. If I had been advising him, I would have said, listen, what you should say is, yes, we have made mistakes and we could have done things better. Now is not the time to focus on that. There will be time to look back, but now let's look forward and get this virus under control and solved. The fact that he didn't say that is a shame, because he's politicizing it again. He doesn't want to admit making a mistake. We didn't listen. Let's go backwards. This happened all over the world. We didn't listen to what was going on elsewhere in the world. We didn't learn from what others were doing. We were slow into lockdown. We then got carried away by tactics. The Economist, of course, gloriously nailed the dilemma, I think, in their last of March issue, where the cover was lives or livelihoods. A horrendous choice to have to make, but we seem to have flip-flopped between prioritizing one and then go, oh no, we better do livelihoods. Let's have, the biggest super spreader event we can think of. Let's have Eat Out to help out. And actually, history will show that there were lots of lessons that could and should have been learned, and mistakes were made entirely understandably. What a difficult problem for any government. What a difficult problem for any leader. Even worse if the leader then gets it. But, we can look sideways at other countries who have done this differently, who have been led differently, who have the virus under control differently, and have used their messaging more consistently and effectively.
Right. So in your view, if you go back to brand, if we have those numbers again, and I also go back to the businesses are working with it. So in your view, the handling of the pandemic, because every country's been hit by the pandemic, you're saying that you would expect that the effect of how we've handled the pandemic in Britain has had more of a detrimental effect in brand Britain than it would have, say, in brand Germany or brand Sweden. Yeah. Yes,
to be gloriously contrasted, because let's talk about one of our great brand pillars. On the other hand, that rather strange piece of research, which is a great piece of research, which shows, the 12 countries that are working on vaccines and which one would you trust. And in that, of course, we have done very well, because this is a home of great science. It always has been. And many a scientist comes here to do their research. And it is fantastic that we've got vaccines developed here. We've got a vaccination program underway. I will doff my cap at Kate Bingham, actually, who did a fantastic job of negotiating, buying the right vaccines, having enough of them. And that is why we're ahead of that program. I would much prefer it if we were humble in our delivery and didn't feel it necessary to score the political points of we're ahead of this country and that country and the other one. But while we're on science, isn't it depressing to see how many people have left our academic world to go back home? I believe it's 11,000 academics have left in the last year. And this is from a nation that has 2 of the top 3 universities in the world, and science and academia, big brand pillar for brand Britain. Are we going to be able to build on the strength that we once had is an open question.
I think it's the 11,000 over 4 since Brexit.
Yeah.
But going back to, so how has the effect of what's happened with our universities, what's happened with our schools, what's that doing to our reputation then at the same time? So we had a pillar, it's education. That pillar feeds into science, for example. So what you're saying is we're actually undermining pillars underneath.
Yes. Now, I think some of this is the unintended consequence of the actions. It's not that anybody's setting about doing that. And it is, nobody could have foreseen this coming at the same time as Brexit. But I imagine history will question, was it really necessary to continue full steam ahead with Brexit when we could have taken a time out and focused on the virus? But again, it is what it is, and we are where we are, to say those terrible phrases. Any minute now, I'll talk about pivoting and I'll have the full hat trick.
So go back to one of the issues that we mentioned was this, when we were chatting, is this issue called targetology. So there is not the basic reality is there's not a short of numbers being used, but to your one that you explained earlier about the number of computers that we're going to get for schools. What's the issue with targetology? So the Prime Minister's asked a question, he's given a number. What's the problem with it?
Well, it's an interesting use of sophisticated rhetoric, which still is inauthentic because it's not true. And actually, you know, it has the appearance of truth. Targetology, when people go, oh yeah, we better put a number against that, because if we do, it'll make it more believable. And many a time, you know, as journalists have then drilled into the numbers afterwards, they found that they were not fully detailed. So that notion of targetology is one that really depresses me. And that's why, you know, was it necessary to talk about world-beating track and trace when we didn't have one? Having a track and trace system might have been good. Was it necessary to build our own app when we could have taken somebody else's app and worked with it and enhanced it, and so on and so on. So, you know, mistake after mistake, and to make it worse with no acknowledgement that they have been made. But as I say, you know, what a dilemma. It's very easy for me to sit in my study here and say this, absolutely impossible for the people who are doing it day in, day out. So, you know, trying to not be disrespectful and trying to do it from a brand perspective. Because if a brand...
It does sound, the big difference that you're saying is just they didn't follow basics, and that's very harsh. But work out what your data, have a strategy, follow the strategy, listen to the audience, and adapt.
Yeah,
is it that basic?
It is that basic, and indeed, you know, I was much heartened. There's a Gartner survey published a couple of weeks ago asking CMOs around the world what they think the core capability necessary is to build back the world stronger. And it is indeed, by a country mile, brand strategy. And the application of brand strategy is much more difficult to do than it is to say, but it is about the basics. It is about making sure you focus your resources and you learn when things change and you adapt. But let's imagine you know, we had a very clear plan for brand Britain, and actually we had thought, right, item number one is how we deliver Brexit against that, and then the pandemic had hit. Maybe it would have been easier to manage the crisis if we'd have had more clarity about the strategy of what we're trying to build, rather than the targetology of sovereignty. And we're going to take back control. Take back control, brilliant 3 words. And as we know, very much won the uncivil war. What do they mean? What control? Control of what, to whose benefit, and to what end? You know,
All right. So what do you? So there were good messaging from a political campaign. You think there've been bad messaging for the pandemic?
Yeah. Well, I think the messaging at the beginning, and credit because, you know, most of the audience here are from the creative services industry. Credit to our friends and colleagues at Mullen Lowe, who did a great job of simplifying, using the rule of 3. You couldn't possibly knock, you know, stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. It was very clear, very crisp, and indeed we all did. Now, if you then move on to the next slogan, which I understand was generated in-house by some of Dominic Cummings' team, stay alert, control the virus. You know, really? I mean, what were any of us supposed to do? We were all pretty alert anyway, weren't we? And what did it mean? And I understand, you know, it's a bit like, I always knew I was in trouble if I was in possession of an end line that I had to explain to somebody. You know, the moment you have to explain an end line, you're already struggling. And I understand that it took 7 pages to explain what stay alert, control the virus, and whatever the third bit of it was meant. But you know, and of course, here we are demonstrating that point gloriously, because we've gone back to the beginning and we're using the same 3-word construct again, quite rightly so.
All right. So if I go to you forward, building brand Britain, right? So you mentioned pillars, which, you know, this is not on any data, so it's a bit hard. What pillars would be your pillars? Obviously there's commercial pillars. So you mentioned bank finance, you'd build, but what about what other pillars would you do? You mentioned science, education.
Science, education. I mean, I do think it's worth talking about some of our characteristics. You know, our humor has traveled around the world. Our ability for self-deprecation has traveled around the world. We take what we do very seriously, but we don't take ourselves very seriously. and we've been much admired for that. So let's not forget that. I mean, when you look at that Barclays survey you're talking about, or indeed the Made in Britain stuff, Made in Britain is seen as a stamp that connotes quality, heritage and style. So we've got some good things going for us. I mean, I would certainly, if I were in that chair, want to delve into what are the brand pillars that we can really build on, and what can we rebirth to move ahead, because you can't go backwards. But, you know, let's just reflect on what the Crown has done for the reputation of another great financial pillar of this country, which is the royal family. And actually the reputation of the Queen has gone through the roof, courtesy of the Crown, and much loved. So we're loved for all sorts of things. But the word I most frequently hear about what people think of us now, and I'm translating loosely, is people are bemused about what we want to be. So we want to be, you know, a global power again, but, you know, we're not going to be a global power. We have immense soft power, and we should build on that. We should think about our culture, and we should think about our heritage in art, and we should focus on our services, because 80% of the revenue of this country comes from services. And you know, it's woeful that that hasn't been focused on. This audience is an audience we should be fiercely proud of. Our creative services are amongst the best in the world and recognized as such. You know, we need to focus on that and celebrate where we're strong, and not be distracted by the things that we're no longer good at. I love the fact that we have a rich heritage in building cars. We sold all of that off. I mean, whenever I see a Mini disappearing into the dust in front of me, I always enjoy the irony of the German engineer who decided to put the Union Jack in the brake lights, just to remind us.
Probably that was deliberate as well.
Yeah.
Right, so go back. So if you had a plan, right? So you, I'm not saying you have the job. You, though obviously they wouldn't have to go through any interview process or any formal procurement. But if you did take the job, and you had to do a plan for this year, what would be the key things that you would do? So what, you know, difficult, you know, but what one or two
well,
things?
I think we've touched on many of them, and to kind of bring them together, you know, we need to really make these strategic choices about what we want to be in the next phase, where we're going to invest, and what we should build. I mean, there's a great article today in the FT of the First Lord, whatever he's called, the guy who's in charge of the Navy, talking about, and it reminded me that we've just reinvested masses of money in our military in order to become, you know, one of the powers in the world. And I was reading that thinking, is that right? Do we really want to do that? I mean, shouldn't money be going somewhere else? Shouldn't it be going to broadband, digital, protecting future and jobs? But in danger of using a tactic, ironically, 2021 has two key global events taking place in this Isle of Wonder, which I think are opportunities for the government and those that love brand Britain to rebuild it. Obviously, the G7 in Cornwall in June is one of those, and what Boris does there, how he does it, how he enters the lead role again will be interesting.
So right, so can I just stop you there? So what's your worry versus what he should do? So you mentioned the Biden Boris. What's your, you know, if you were to say to Boris, please don't, and you would say to Boris, please do, what would be the please don't?
Well, please don't overtalk it and overpromise and underdeliver. Probably a great place to listen to, you know, what else has gone round the world, because they should focus on the pandemic, where we are, what we've learned from it, what the world can do better, what we can all do next time for this never to happen. And then I'm sure they'll also focus on economic recovery. And it would be great to be listening more than he's speaking, is what I would say. And it would be wonderful to listen to what some of the other world leaders have done and see the lessons come out of that we can learn.
One of the things Pimento Net was done, there's a sale supposedly, so it's one thing that's going to clients is everybody's sitting there procrastinating, so they're waiting for the end. Do you think by June one of the things they should be doing, 'cause that's what worries me, we keep on waiting, you keep on saying this, they're tactical, they're like a cricketer chasing a ball, but they're at the same time they're not doing the forward planning. Should they target that to have a
They
forward
should,
plan?
they should, and I hope they are. But I also think the more significant event is on the 1st of November up in Glasgow when we host COP26, because that is where we can talk about what, again, one of our great brands and great creative industries does. Anybody who sees Planet Earth or David Attenborough's latest one knows that we are the home of bringing to creative life the problem of the planet. Wouldn't it be great if we were also the home of bringing to life the actions necessary to save it? And they won't be done by kicking the can down the road with 25-year plans. They'll be done by what we're doing this year, what we're doing next year, what our short-term horizon is. So I'm sure, by the way, there are teams of people focusing on these things already, and I wish them the very best of luck and focus as they do that.
Just to clear, there is on the government website, a 25-year plan. And if you calculate it starting in 2018, it will finish 6 years before the sequel of Blade Runner is set.
Well, and ironically, if we don't take some of the actions that need taking faster, whoever is alive at the time will probably be living in a world that looks like the sequence of Blade Runner. So, we all know the urgency of that, but that whole need to think again about people, planet, and profit, and the full-on ECG agenda, and to take leadership in that space, I think is a great opportunity for Britain to return to the top of the pile. And we've got the expertise in the country. Actually, we've got the science, we've got the research institutes, we've got the brains, we've got the people that could do this. They need convening and focusing, and I'm sure we could get that done too.
All right, I'm going to start taking questions from the chat, if that's okay. I've got some that have been pre-sent, so you get first go. Joe Rigby, I'm sorry if I don't get his name. Do you think our future of Brand Britain should have a 4-day working week, and would that make us happier?
I love that question. I mean, I think, first of all, depends on I would say this, wouldn't I? Depends on what the strategy is, depends on what we're trying to do. But I do think as a tactic, it's going to be necessary. I'm very worried about the impact on everybody working and living like this, the mental health impact of that. And I also think, we should all be worried about, is there going to be enough money to go around? So a 4-day week, on the one hand, would allow for some well-being focus, and on the other might allow for some job sharing and get us into a different future. But I think a 4-day week is a tactic in pursuit of a strategy.
Okay, I've got another question here. Do we need some sort of Lincoln project to challenge the current government? So people who aren't the Labour Party, I don't know if you know, aware of the Lincoln project in America. So it sort of stood up against the Republicans, almost what everybody said. Do we need a Lincoln project?
I think that's a wonderful idea. It is worth saying, because the Lincoln project is about Republicans doing things differently. I mean, I think there are probably, everybody on this call is probably a lover of the nation that we grew up in for all of its good things. I think we could do with convening, which isn't about a political thing, but it is a citizen's notion of how can we build Britain back better. So yes, I think we could do with that.
So I'll take a couple of questions I'll combine. Someone says brands are often, well, obviously we're talking about the external, but brands are often built on the internal. Yep. To what extent do we need to heal, and how would we heal? How important is it to heal internally before we can sort ourselves out externally?
I think it's very important, but that can be done quite fast on the whole, depending on the leaders in place, but it also depends on the infrastructure. And, thinking you and I talked about, let's share here, the government used to have the COI. The COI were experts in communication. And for those of you that ever did communication for them, you would know that they were great deliverers of a really clear brief against a clear strategy and really clear metrics that you would be measured against. I don't think the government has any infrastructure that would enable this healing of doing things professionally to happen. So I think that should be rebirthed. But I also do think, some of the leader at the table on the other side of the house seems to me better prepared to help in the healing and learn the lessons of what's just gone, as long as it's not too politicized. And that's, again, so easy to say and so difficult to do, because they're always looking to land political blows.
What about, we all talk about, there's different phrases for it, leveling up, there's all other sandbox, but then we've got the ones around the pandemic where the new normal or the new equilibrium. At the moment, that seems to be almost left to the businesses themselves to decide what they want to do. Do you think the government should be intervening in that area? So let's say we go back to your point about education, or you talked about the online platform. Do you think the government should now go, right, we're not just going to let this happen. We've got an opportunity to do something else?
Yeah, I do think they should really embrace the power of some of the businesses we've got and get them to work together more constructively. And the businesses themselves should be thinking of the collective whole. But this is, why I paused was because, I do think tax is an issue here. And when, how are we going to fund all of this gets back on the table. I'm a big fan of, shouldn't there just be a one-off tax for those that can do it, to go, listen, we've got to repair and heal. Let's have a one-off tax and then we can get on with it. And let's avoid people being able to avoid paying tax, because the money will be necessary to deliver. But I don't think corporations are used to deliver the power they could. So they should be convened to do that.
And if you had a strap line for our new government? Sorry, you did not know that was. What would be your strap line? What the new would it be?
Well, I mean, the words that pop into my, obviously, just do it is the irresistible. Let's steal that from Nike. But I do think, we shouldn't need a strap line. The government should embody all the things we've talked about. They should be trusted. They should be reliable. They should do what they say, and we should be able to count on them, and we should be able to hold them to account as well. So for you creative people who like a strap line, come up with a strap line then, because I failed instantly to give you one.
Well, going back to a bank one, what about the listening country? How's that?
The listening government, that was, I love that. That's available. That's long gone. But, I do think being the listening government would be a great place to start, and getting especially some young voices at the table. You look at lots of board governance, a lot of them are bringing in youth advisory panels. There's a lot of listening, of reverse mentoring and stuff like that happening, and the government should learn from that.
Okay, to see any more questions. I thought I'm going to wind up, I think, Stephen, if that's all right for you, unless we've got one more to check on the chat.
No, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you to Mark and thank you to David. Exceptional discourse, really interesting points of view as always. Plenty of key lessons there for obviously our own brands as well as obviously Brand Britain. Interesting times. I think there's an awful lot that can be done, and for me, the most important thing is actually back to the last point that David made, which is actually how do we get representation, true representation, for not just the youth of today, but across the whole BAM community. The future is a multicultural society where everybody has a point of view, where everybody basically can be part of this wonderful country and can actually help to drive both the wealth and the reputation of our brand around the world. Next week, coming up, we have, it's a turn of the retail experts and a session entitled Where Next for the High Street. I'll be leading a panel of experts. It's same time, same place, so feel free to come along if you'd like to join us. A video of today's call will be up on the Pimento catch-up channel on YouTube. I'd like to thank once again Mr. David Wheldon and Mr. Mark Palmer for their time and attention today. Great session. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and let's look forward to a brighter future. Goodbye.
Thanks a lot, Sim.
Thanks.
David.